Hello, my name is Andrew Keane. Welcome to Keane on America, the daily interview show about the United States. Hello, everybody. One of my favorite recent shows was with Fareed Zakaria. He came on the show a few months ago to talk about the paperback version of his book, Age of Revolutions. We, of course, talked America and Trump, and I was particularly intrigued that Zakaria appeared on another prominent internet show, podcast show, the David Frum Show, which is put on by The Atlantic, and Zakaria was talking to Frum about what it means to be an American. They're old friends. They met at Harvard many years ago. So I thought we would get David Frum on the show and reverse the question. So, David, welcome to Keane on America. For you, what does it mean to be American? You came here as a young man, as a student at Yale University. You grew up in Canada. So will you be celebrating July 4th, David?
So I'll give you a backstory to my conversation with Fareed. As you say, I've known him since the middle 1980s. And we're both naturalized American citizens. He's born in India and became American. I'm born in Canada. My question to him for this discussion was whether there were any second thoughts about that decision, because we both were pulled into Americanism by a certain idea of America that's been called into question over the past decade. Your question to me about the 4th of July just points to special complexities. The Canadian-American relationship is in one way very simple, speak the same language, have many of the same customs, many of the same habits, many of the same institutions, share much of the same history. Even the accent is very slightly different. An English accent sounds quite different to American ears. It takes some pretty close listening to tell the difference between someone from Ontario and someone from, say, Ohio. But Canada is the product of an American Civil War, which is how Canadians remember the Revolution of 1776. I spend much of the year in a small town in Ontario, directly across the lake, which was settled by refugees from the American Revolution. In fact, I live on a road called Loyalist Parkway in honor of those refugees who exited up the Hudson and then across the Mohawk, crossed Lake Ontario to stay loyal to King and the old country. And that's where I usually am on the 4th of July, where the 4th of July is an important holiday, but it's also a complicated holiday because it's the birth of Canada as well in protest against the revolution and in loyalty to the old association across the Atlantic with the common ancestor of both the United States and Canada, Great Britain.
So is that your way of saying that what it means to be an American is to be a rebel, to go back to Canada and celebrate losing a civil war?
There is indispensably, inevitably, a revolutionary aspect to the American heritage. President Roosevelt famously said, when he's talking to the daughters of the American Revolution at a time, a lot of reactionary feelings in certain parts of American society, he said to them, "Never forget that all of us, and you and I especially, are the descendants of immigrants and revolutionists." So there is a revolutionary aspect. It's also true that the United States exists because it crushed a counter-revolution, which is what the Civil War was. And so there's an aspect of continuity. I think the reason that I thought this conversation was so timely with Fareed, and I timed it for the first anniversary of the show, that's how important I thought the discussion was many of the ideas of what it means to be in America are now in question in the age of Trump in a way that they're always in question, but in a very painful way they're in question. And there's some question whether the United States represents in the world what it used to mean. That there is something, both Fareed and I grew up with the idea that America was something more than just another great power. Its great power was exercised in conjunction and in service to certain ideals. And those ideals are very out of fashion in the age of Trump. As you and I speak, the United States is in the throes of a war with Iran. And President Trump has made clear that America's goals in that war, as in his previous wars in Venezuela, are purely predatory. He wants to invade Iran, take its oil, enrich the United States by impoverishing the Iranians, by depriving them of their oil, not to bring freedom, not to bring a better way of life, but just to go around plundering like some kind of bandit band. That's not the America that I believed in and that I chose to merge my fate with.
So you're disappointed, David, in America. Is that fair?
Well, America's a big place full of a lot of people, and and I'm a very small speck. So I think it would be kind of presumptuous. It's not that I have.
Well, it sounds disappointment. It sounds to me like
it means that I'm rethinking. I'm trying to rethink in service of my own actions and commitments. What does it mean? How can I do my part to bring the country back to what I think is a better path?
some people might be listening or watching David and thinking, well, here's this guy, David Frum. Now he's expressing a degree of disappointment in Trump. You've written a couple of major critiques of Trump. You're not alone there. But you were the guy who came up with the term axis of evil. You worked with George Bush in the first series of wars, which are the beginning in many ways of the slippery slope, perhaps, to Iran. How would you respond to that kind of criticism?
I'm not, again, I think I'm not going to insert my own personality too much into this. George W. Bush, I think, is a president very much in the American tradition. The United States was struck on 9/11 by terrorist enemies. The United States had been dealing for 20 years with Iraq because of the unsettled aftermath of Iraq's war of aggression against Kuwait in 1990. The fuse to the Iraq War of 2003 is lit because after Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, they were repelled in 1991, and they made certain commitments as the condition of the peace they got from the United States and the global coalition that the United States led. And Iraq, Saddam Hussein's Iraq, then over the next dozen years violated again and again the terms on which it had made peace. And so that was an endless series of near confrontations. Bill Clinton nearly returned to war with Iraq in 1994. He struck Iraq with devastating airstrikes in 1998, all because Iraq was violating the terms of that 1991 armistice. In 2003, President Bush, in the aftermath of 9/11, in a time when America was more impatient, more anxious, less willing to hope for the best, he followed in that path. When he went to war, he did so in the name of the very ideals that I'm lamenting we do not observe in the time of Donald Trump. That it wasn't just as Donald Trump criticized George W. Bush, that he didn't go to Iraq to steal Iraq's oil. He went to Iraq with a view of overthrowing a dictatorship and bringing about a more stable democratic future for Iraq. That project was not successful, although Iraq today is an emerging stable country and is in better shape than it was before the war, although at a terrible cost along the way. But Bush, I think, is very much a president in the American tradition, and Donald Trump is very much a president against the American tradition.
In that conversation with Fareed about what it means to be an American, he said when he came to grad school or undergraduate, he was attracted with the idea of America. You both came at the same time, that you're able to be yourself. Do you think that's true? And then what would that mean to be David Frum?
Well, that's a mighty question. Can I have it in more digestible bites?
Well, deal with the first one about being yourself. Do you think that many people came late 20th century to America to, quote unquote, I'm quoting Fareed, I mean, you didn't say it, to be oneself? I'm not sure what that means because I'm never sure how we determine what ourselves are.
Well, look, most of the millions of people came to the United States first from across the Atlantic and then from all over the world, came to better their economic condition. And one of the reasons you could better your economic condition was that until very recently, life in America was much more fluid than life in other places. Until very recently, this was a less class-bound society than other societies, and there were more opportunities to self-reinvent, not only economically, but in all kinds of other ways, artistically, culturally, personally, that people could have a kind of degree of personal, individual, sexual freedom that was difficult to have in other societies. I'm not sure that claim is still. I'm not sure that America now is so very different from other advanced countries. I'm not sure that there's that much more opportunity to be yourself in today's America than there is in today's Germany. But maybe just the scale of it, and variety of ways there are to live. I mean, there's just more different ways to be an American than there are different ways to be a German, because America is so very, very much bigger. It's a continent. And I think, we, just the very act of migrating creates a new opportunity. But I think it's also true that here, as everywhere else, we are products. One of the my probably I have a series of views from most conservative to least conservative, and I'm not sure this is one of my least conservative or my most conservative views, but I do think a lot of who we are is determined before we're born. It's our genetic inheritance. One of the things I'm very conscious of is I come from a family with bad health. My mother died young. My daughter died young. I'm in my 60s. I've never spent a night in a hospital. So the gift of that random gift of health, I didn't deserve that. I didn't earn that. I just got it. My mother didn't deserve, my daughter didn't deserve what happened to them. They just got it. And all that was decided at the moment of conception, I think. And we then are the unlucky victims of bad luck, or the more or less fortunate beneficiaries of different fortune.
Although, of course, Machiavelli famously wrote that fortune favors the brave. Coming back to David Frum, the second part of the question about being oneself, do you think that you've spent all your adult, most of your adult life here, you've had a few years in the UK, you've been backwards and forwards to Canada, but do you think that you have, so to speak, realized yourself in this country? You've done many different things, some with more success than others, but you've been a very prominent and mostly successful public figure.
I don't do a lot of that kind of temperature taking. I'm sorry to say. So I'm going to be a very inadequate answerer to that question. It's not really it's not the way I think. I don't evaluate myself. I don't compare myself. I see very much a path in front of me of things that I want or need to do, things I feel it's my duty to do, things it's my fate to do. I just do them. And I think one of the things I know, a piece of advice I give to people who write is there are three reasons. If you're having trouble writing, and you've got the skill, you've worked at it, there are usually three reasons why you have trouble writing. The first is that you have not organized your thoughts as well as you think you had. You pitched something in speech. You said, I want to do this or that. But the level of mental organization you need for speaking is less than the degree of mental organization you need to do for writing. And what you discover when you start writing is you didn't think this through as clearly as you persuaded your editor you had when you talked about it. So that's reason one. You haven't thought it through clearly. Reason number two is actually you haven't done the research, that you find out you're going to argue something and you just don't know enough about the subject. And so the first is a kind of organization problem. The second is a research problem. You think, I was going to write, the history of the tennis ball, and I don't know as much about the tennis ball as I thought I did. But the third reason, and the reason most afflicts people who write a lot, is self-consciousness. They sit down. I'm going to use an old-fashioned image because I'm an old-fashioned person, at the typewriter with the blank piece of paper. And instead of seeing the blank piece of paper and focusing on the thoughts in their head and the process of transference from head to paper, they become aware of themselves. They become subject to an external eye, and they see themselves at the typewriter. Again, I'm an old-fashioned person using an old-fashioned image. And they think, is this what I should be doing? Is this who I am? Is this me? And that self-consciousness is crippling. And I try not to succumb to it. So I'm in the process right now. I've been working for a while on a memoir, and the memoirs of things I've seen, of things I've done, of people I knew, of what it's meant, how the changes I've seen in the world over the past half century. But I don't spend a lot of time thinking about who I am and how I fit in, because that's just not the way my brain's organized.
Yeah, you told me when we met a couple of weeks ago in DC at a book party, you mentioned that book, but you also said that you were, and correct me if I'm wrong, a little ambivalent, unsure if you really wanted to, well, part of it's been written, but if you really wanted to publish it, as opposed to the David Frum show, be the David Frum book. Are you pretty confident that it'll come out eventually, David?
There's a story. I hope it's true. I've never had the heart to check it. Bess Truman, Harry Truman's wife, comes downstairs, and they're living in their retirement house in Independence, Missouri, and she sees Harry Truman burning all her old love letters. And she said, "Harry, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm sorry, I've gotten this backwards. It was Bess who was burning them. Bess is burning Harry's letters."
Okay.
And I
Were
beg
there
your
a
pardon,
lot
that's
of them?
important.
Was it a
They
library?
were a very devoted
just
couple. And
one?
they were, and the story goes anyway. This may not. Again, this is the oral tradition. We're not going to look too hard into the footnotes. The story goes that Harry Truman said to her, "Bess, why are you burning all my old letters? Think of history." To which she replied, "I am thinking of history." She didn't want other people reading her letters. So there are some parts of this book where I write it down and think, you know what? This needs to go into a lead-lined box into the basement of the Smithsonian until everyone involved is dead. So I don't know. I haven't decided that part of it, but I know I'm going to finish it and then decide.
Coming back to this idea of lucky, you noted earlier that you felt you don't do a lot of you're not a particularly introspective person, but you do consider yourself lucky in comparison with your mother, for example. You've lived pretty well. You've never got sick.
Not to be exact, I'm introspective. I'm not, but my introspection is not temperature taking. That is, I don't ask myself, how am I doing? I think a lot about what should I do, but I don't think a lot about am I a very good boy? That's not the way I think about it. I think about I'm inward a lot, but I'm action directed rather than self-evaluation directed. So your question to me, I was bristling a little bit about
right now. I take your point, but I wanted to try and square the circle, the David Frum and America connection. Do you think that America historically has thought of itself as lucky? I mean, the conventional colonial British narrative is that these Europeans stumbled onto this promised land of abundant nature and resources. And some people would argue they screwed it up or they exploited it. Some people say they realized it in a religious or economic sense. But do you think that the fact that Americans or America thinks of itself in the context of luck, is that one way of thinking about the 250th anniversary?
Well, I think the phrase "the lucky country" is usually applied to Australia, not the United States. I think there's an easy refutation to the idea that America was somehow destined to achieve everything it achieved, and that's the counterexample of Argentina. Why is Argentina not a more successful country? It's because of choices that were made along the way. And I've always been fascinated with the history of Argentina. Here's a country that had so many advantages. In many ways, it's like the bookend to my native Canada. A more benign climate than Canada, slightly different agricultural situation, but still abundant land, lots of natural resources. Very lightly settled indigenous population. That there were crimes committed by the settlers against the indigenous people of the Argentine, but the populations were relatively small, and so it's not like what happened east of the Mississippi, where millions of people were displaced. The numbers in Argentina were a lot less, and yet Argentina has been a society that has not realized itself in the way that I think most Argentines would wish, and why not? The American story is one of tremendous human achievement, both physical to develop this land and institutional. And I don't think you can call a society that went through traumas like the American Revolution. I mean, there's the colonial Williamsburg story where it all, it's with the little hats and the wooden guns and it all seems very harmless. But the American Revolution was, I think if I remember this right, relative to the population, the bloodiest war America ever fought. And then the horrific trauma of the Civil War and the long agony of slavery and the ordeals of Reconstruction and Depression and 2 world wars. Americans have been through a lot, but they've built something, and that's been a benefit not just to them, but to this is the part I really believe, and this goes back to my feeling that Bush is in the American tradition and Trump is not. Something that has been a gift not just to themselves and to their own posterity, but to all the planet. I think the course of American history has made the whole planet a better place. And that part of the responsibility of being an American is realizing that with the extraordinary achievements of the United States has come the claim of leadership, and with the claim of leadership has come the responsibilities of leadership.
Yeah, coming back to Fareed's point about as individuals being able to be oneself, could one broaden that, generalize it, and talk about America realizing itself, being itself for most of its history? Are you suggesting that today Trump's America is somehow foreign to itself?
I just think when you have political leaders like this, America became a great power in the early 20th century, and it became the supreme great power during and after the Second World War. And the years since the Second World War, and especially since the Cold War, have been years where American leadership, not alone and working in conjunction with partners, have brought an ever widening system of prosperity and freedom and peace to more and more of the world. And while we're always transfixed by these horrific struggles that break out, the historians tell us that relative to the denominator of the world's population, that the past 30 years have been a comparatively peaceful time compared to some other, certainly compared to the 20th century. And that was an American achievement, and it was done because American leaders had the wisdom to understand it's just to go to war to steal oil. It's just a stupid thing to do. The cost of the war is so much greater than if you want the oil, go buy it. You want to develop more oil wells, invest in them. That Donald Trump's vision of plunder is not the way America has led the world, which is to say to everyone, we can all be better off if we trade, if we live in systems of collective security, if we trade in freedom, everyone's better off. And by the way, the poorest people will get better off faster, but that's okay. Because America's wealthy enough, it will get better off too, just not as fast as other people. But everyone's better off, including Americans themselves.
So it is this foreignness that Trump is somehow or Trumpism, what you call the Trumpocracy, has somehow invaded or taken over this country.
Well, that's it's obviously not an invasion. Trump has broken a lot of laws in power, but he has come to power by more or less legal means. There was some dirty pool in his first election. I think the evidence is that he consciously accepted Russian help to become president. I don't know how decisive it was, but he consciously accepted it. I don't think he sought it, and I don't think he was in a conspiracy with the Russians, but the Russians helped him, and he knew it, and he didn't repudiate it. But he came to power by legal means and with the votes of tens of millions of people. So it's not an invasion. It's not utterly alien. There's something there. America's always been a struggle. There were two sides to the Civil War. There were two sides to Reconstruction. It wasn't just a tiny handful of a few. And one of the critiques I would make of some of the progressive politics of our day, and not just the progressive politics, is that some people are inclined to think when anything bad happens, it's because of a tiny cabal of sinister, connected people, and not to understand, when bad things happen, they typically happen because of something that is universally present in human beings. And that the whole work of politics is to overcome those negative tendencies in human beings and speak to what Lincoln called the better angels in our nature, and to remind human beings that being generous, being tolerant, being peaceful is the wisest course in the long run for the most people.
Some people might, again, be listening to this and thinking, well, no one's a great fan of what you call this Trumpocracy. Is an annoying person invading other countries or claiming to invade other countries. But taken in the broader scheme of American history, of slavery, of the massacre of native peoples, of Jim Crow, of some of the Cold War wars, particularly in Vietnam, Trump is a minor affliction. Do you think that's wrong?
I think it's not interesting. Is Trump worse than slavery? No. Is slavery today's problem? No. You get the problem that's in front of you. I think of this when I think isn't there some joke? I think some comedian has a joke about the errant husband who tries to excuse his errant behavior by reminding his wife of some tremendous historical catastrophe. Yeah, okay, well, the Battle of the Somme does not excuse you stepping out the way you did. The Battle of the Somme happened. You still had your choice. It's on you. And so, yeah, Trump is our dilemma today. Slavery is in the American history books. It shaped American society. It's obviously a much greater crime than anything Donald Trump has ever done. But he's done his own crimes, and he doesn't get off the hook by pointing to some greater crimes that have occurred at points in the past.
In your conversation with Fareed, he talked to me about this. He's written books. We've all written books about this, about the loss of faith in American elites, which has somehow triggered Trump and the Trumpocracy that you described. Do you think that's true? And in that sense, as a graduate of Yale, very prominent figure on the East Coast. I'm not saying you're responsible, David, but all of us, my tech people in San Francisco, your intellectuals on the East Coast, we all have a degree of responsibility for what's gone wrong with America.
I would say this was a livelier conversation in 2016 and 2017 than it is in 2026. I think we can certainly point to, in the period after the Cold War, when America came out of that Cold War and had a great deal of self-confidence, and there's a lot of consensus among the overlapping circles of finance and technology and politics about what's the right thing to do. I mean, I think probably from the years 1993 to 2007, powerful and influential Americans agreed with each other more over that period than ever before since. And they made that group, that overlapping group, had a lot of opinions about things, some of which proved very badly wrong. The decisions that led to the financial crisis of 2007, the deregulation of certain aspects of finance, those proved very badly wrong. The thinking that led to the Iraq War, that proved a serious misjudgment. And so so those circles did discredit themselves, and Trump sort of arose, yes, partly in reaction to those misjudgments. But that was a decade ago. So we went from government by a consensus that was maybe a little smug and complacent by very smart and knowledgeable people, to government over the past 10 years by people who are the dumbest, the worst, and the crookedest in the country. and their record is not so, it's not like the switch from the best and the brightest to the dumbest and the worst and the crookedest has yielded better results. The United States is mired now in a war in Iran that no one quite knows why it was done in the first place, unlike the Iraq War of 2003, where President Bush went to Congress, explained what he was doing, got a vote, went to the United Nations twice, had a large buy-in from the American people, had a program, had a goal. Didn't work, but it wasn't a completely whimsical adventure to now, to the inflation, to the mismanagement, to the tariffs, to the scale of corruption and plunder at the top of the system. So I think I think the time for that, I'm just blanking on the name. Who is Bill Clinton's incredibly distinguished Secretary of the Treasury? His name I've just forgotten.
Right.
Okay, well, we're done with him. We're done with him. Let's try idiocracy instead. I think the time is to say, you know what, we have just discovered over these Trump years why we ask for some expertise. When Trump, as you and I speak, Trump is just abandoning this. Trump briefly proposed as his director of national intelligence, the central coordinating official in the entire intelligence bureaucracy. There are 12.5 intelligence agencies. They produce conflicting reports. The office of the DNI is to bring about some kind of human unity and harmony and perspective. And Trump appointed just a goon to run that office. And you think, you know what? Smug is bad. Goons are bad. And we've been doing goons for a decade. Now it's time maybe to reverse and try to go back to the way things were and do a better version of what we had before, rather than living forever under this goonocracy.
So if that loss of faith in elites is a rather stale conversation now, what should the conversation be in 2026? You were a Republican. You resigned your membership, I think, or you burnt your card. You're not really a Democrat. You're a centrist, maybe a conservative centrist, rather like John Roush. I know he's a very good friend of yours, very good friend of mine and in the show. What kind of conversation should guys like yourself be having in June of 2026?
Well, there's an immediate conversation and a long-term conversation. The immediate conversation is how do we make American governing institutions work again in an honest and effective way? What do we do about this? We've had plundered. People sometimes say Donald Trump is the most corrupt president in American history, and I always chafe at that because there's no runner-up. There's nothing like this. If Donald Trump were president of the Philippines or Belarus or Nigeria, he'd be the most corrupt president in the history of the Philippines, Belarus, or Nigeria.
He's worse than Marcos?
Donald Trump he's now been in the second term in office for about 15 months, if I'm doing the math right. He's collected about $4 billion in payments from favor seekers, domestic and foreign. He's inserted in. He's purported to insert into this sham litigation he did with the Department of Justice, an agreement where he and his family will be exempt from tax audit for the rest of their lives, which means their taxes are essentially voluntary. He has been apportioning American foreign policy. He sets tariffs according to gifts to him. He changed the tariff rate for Vietnam because the Vietnamese approved a Trump family golf course. It's nothing like this has ever been seen in American history, and it's pretty shocking even by the standards of some less developed countries. So how do we get through this, and how do we rebuild institutions in an honest and effective way? What is going to be the 2020s equivalent to the burst of reforms that we saw after Watergate that tried to put American government, effectively did, back on a more functional course and tidy up some of the abuses and the extremes, and maybe bring some of the guilty people to some kind of justice? All of that said, once you've gotten past that, one of the things that most depresses me about the Trump years has been 10 years of wasted time for a series of problems that are deeper and enduring, from the collapse in the birth rate to climate change, to the challenges of making sure that the new possibilities of computer technology serve human flourishing and don't destroy us. There's so many real problems that are not being met, bringing structures of peace to more and more of the world, making sure that we continue to have a relationship with China where we prepare for the worst but hope for the best, and never cease holding out the hand of friendship to China to bring it into the club of responsible nations, but also being prepared for the possibility that they may not choose to join the club of responsible nations. There are so many deep, real problems, and there's been no progress on any of these things for a decade, while we've been racked with how do we stop the president from stealing the furniture.
So you remain cautiously optimistic? Is that a fair way of putting it, or have you given up?
No, again, that goes back to this temperature taking. I am neither optimistic nor pessimistic, because that means having opinions about things where it's unknowable. I don't know what the future holds. I know what we have to do, and I know what I want to do.
So what do we have to do, David? Does it require new political parties?
The mechanism. First, we figure out what we have to do, then we figure out the mechanism to do it. So what we have to do is we have to have a new era of political reform like that of the 1970s, where we say that Donald Trump, he broke some laws, but in other cases, he just discovered that laws that weren't written down. No one had ever written down a law that said the president can't operate a profit-making business while serving as president. That's not against the law. It should be, but it's not. No one has ever said it's against the law to make it, and this is a new problem, fake AI advertising in which you represent your political opponents saying and doing things they never said or did. That's not a law, but maybe that should be a law. So we and other things where it is against the law. It's against the law for the president to accept gifts from foreign governments. The president can't accept a free airplane from the Emir of Qatar, but he did it, and we don't have mechanisms to stop him. So in some cases, we need new laws. In some cases, we need new enforcement. But and how we get there, that will require, there are some mechanism questions. Do the Republicans cooperate with that or not? But once you're on the other side of that, that's where the hard work begins, because we have a 21st century that has real responsibilities and challenges that we've wasted a decade not meeting.
What about you? You mentioned technology. Is that the problem or the solution? More and more people seem, coming back to this idea of America being itself. America was always optimistic, forward-looking. More and more young Americans in particular no longer believe in the future and are very, very suspicious at best of new technologies like AI.
Yeah. Well, I lived through a period of maybe undue technological enthusiasm in the 1990s, where we believed the technology would make the world a better place in a way that machines can't do. And now and I think I'm chastened a little bit by that experience, that the internet was supposed to bring us all together. You would see these ads if you watch TV in 1997. You would see a little boy in Boston playing chess on the computer with a little girl in Shanghai, and the internet was going to bring us all together in peace and unity. And that didn't exactly happen. The internet gave us the return to polio and measles because it spread anti-vax propaganda. So it wasn't as good as we thought it would be in the 1990s. I tend to think a lot of the anxiety about AI now is a little over torqued on the other side. These are tools. Human beings have to master them. Human beings have to write rules for them. Human beings have to discipline ourselves. Technology always creates temptations. And there's some especially destructive temptations in AI. AI allows us, my biggest worry about AI is not that the robots will kill us all, but that the robots will create a dream, allow us to retreat into a dream world where you can interact with people who are much more amenable, much more pliable than or seeming people. With you can have a conversation that's much more amenable and pliable and deferential to your wishes than you'll ever get from any human being. And people may retreat away from interactions with real human beings into these fake interactions with machines. But those are just dreams; they're not realities. But we have to be equal to it, and we've gone through. I'm old enough to remember when it was a conventional view that human beings wouldn't survive the nuclear bomb. That technology, which seemed certain to wipe out all of human civilization in the 1970s and 1980s, we found ways to bring some order and regularity to it, and we have not had the nuclear holocaust that was so widely feared when I was young, and we can, with the same degree of wisdom, make sure that AI and the other new technologies serve human beings and not harm them.
David, when historians look back at this period, particularly what you call this Trumpocracy, how are they going to describe it? Our mutual friend John Rausch uses the F word. He wrote a very controversial piece for The Atlantic saying, yes, it's fascism. Where are you on this? Do we need new language to describe what's happened in the last 15 years?
Well, I had a proposal that was not widely accepted. In fact, accepted by almost nobody, and it's maybe too fussy, but I liked it. Which is, I said, in science, we use the word oid, the ending oid, to describe something that's like something else. So an alkaloid is not an alkaline; it's like an alkaline. It's an alkaloid. And an asteroid is something that's like a star. Which, the Latin word for star, but it's not a star, so it's called an asteroid. And so I proposed we call what Trump was doing fascoid, because there's a lot of points of similarity to fascism of the 1930s, but all other important differences. And the most important differences are, one, the fascism of the 1920s and 30s was very much a reaction to the experience and horrors of the First World War. People who had been through the First World War came back from that experience not valuing human life very highly, and having a high tolerance for violence of its most intimate form, not just like violence on a screen, but actually taking a truncheon and beating somebody to death right in front of, cracking the bones and cracking the skull right in front of your eyes. They'd seen it happen in the trenches, and they'd done it, and they were ready to do it again. Without the experience of that horror, you're not going to get the same thing. Fascism was a movement of mass mobilization. We live in less of a mass society. And fascism is above all a philosophy of organized violence. Well, we live in a society that is where the center of gravity is middle-aged, not young, and middle-aged people are much less difficult to mobilize to violence than young people are. So we're not going to get what you had in the 1920s and 1930s, but you can see some points of similarity. The structure, the politics based on lying, the politics based on authoritarian reaction, the politics based on cults of leadership. So it's similar, but it's not the same. And we needed language. My proposal was a little too maybe artificial to capture it. So I think we have something that's fascism-like, but is not the same thing as the fascism of the 1930s. One other problem with the word. When I use the word socialism, people understand I'm describing something. And I can also use socialism as an insult, but it's mostly a category, a way of organizing political thought. Whereas fascism, it should be that, but for most of us, we use fascism as an insult. The soup Nazi from Seinfeld. And because of that insult-laden quality of fascism, that the idea that you're using, I'm not actually making a pejorative here. I'm trying to do something analytic when I use the language of fascism. That's not, again, a natural way to speak. So it's a heavy word, but I think we need to draw on its insights, even if we don't use the word itself in exactly its plain form.
And of course, Orwell made that point in his English, in his Politics in the English Language, his very influential essay just after the Second World War, in which he talked about the significance or the centrality of language in politics. Your interview with Fareed, you ended by recommending, I'm not sure how separate these two things were, but you ended by recommending one of my favorite books, Calvino's Invisible City, Invisible Cities, and you reminded everyone of the importance of literacy and politics. Is that also something, David, that's gone wrong in terms of addressing, that we need to read more, maybe not just Invisible Cities, but books rather than tweets or Instagram posts?
I talk about this a lot. I do this in my podcast. I end every episode with a book recommendation. Sometimes long, sometimes short, sometimes more serious, sometimes less serious. Because I think in our age of digital media, it's really important to discover that to remain committed to the experience of text. And one reason it is so important is anyone who reads a lot quickly discovers that you have to develop some mistrust of the narrator. And most works of great literature, whether the narrator is the first person, an I, or whether the narrator purports to be a third person and impartial, you realize you can't always trust the narrator. And so the experience of reading makes you critically engage with your world. One of the books that Freed and I grew up together on and both loved was The Great Gatsby, which everyone reads when they're these days, I think, when they're quite young, and we all love it, and it's so romantic. And Nick Carraway is such a compelling personality. That's the narrator. And sometime along the way, you're going to discover, you know what? Nick Carraway is a shifty and untrustworthy person who tells a lot of lies. And suddenly you read the book. The book now opens up in a completely different way. How do I read this thing if I realize I can't trust Nick? Well, short form video, as we consume it on Instagram Reels or TikTok, is a very naive medium. I mean, it's hardly artificial, but it is designed to entice us into forgetting the presence of the narrator, the creator, and just immersing ourselves in the emotional experience. And look, not that isn't a lot of fun, and not that that can't be great art. I think someday there will be great TikTok and great Instagram artists. It may take some time, but we'll discover this as an art form, and it'll have its own merit. But right now, if you consume a lot of that, it makes you more gullible. And if you read more, it makes you less gullible. And in the internet age, we could all use with a little less gullibility.
Finally, what book then, you brought up Gatsby. Is that the book you'd like all Americans to read? Maybe, Invisible Cities, of course, is a book about the many different views of Venice, thinking about it in all sorts of different ways, different perspectives on Venice. He carries Venice around in his head. What's the book that Americans should be reading? Is it Gatsby for this July 4th, or maybe another book? I mean, everyone has read or at least knows about Gatsby. I'm intrigued, by the way, on your notion of Carraway being so slippery. What was his biggest lie, do you think? Or what do you most suspect about his narrative?
Well, this is not his biggest lie, but this is his most important lie. One of the things that he would have you, one of the things that Nick would have you believe is that he is not dazzled by Gatsby's gangster glamour, that he sees through to a true Gatsby, a deeper Gatsby, and his infatuation with Gatsby is driven by deep values. And he famously shouts at one point, "You're worth the whole damn lot of them." But there are a lot of clues in the book that actually Carraway is seduced by the gangster glamour of Gatsby, and that he comes up with these moral explanations of Gatsby to justify to himself an attraction that he knows he shouldn't feel. One of the points where he has this big scene where he is talking about how horrified he is by all of this gangster glamour. And the very next morning, Gatsby invites him for a ride up in Gatsby's seaplane, which is parked on the Long Island Sound. And Nick is very excited to go. And in 1920, whatever it is, it's a very unusual experience for a person to go up in a privately owned seaplane. But Nick is thrilled, loves it. And so Nick, once you question Nick, you are on your way to a darker view of who Gatsby is and what he's all about, which the narrator has in mind for us to hold. Gatsby is a criminal. And Gatsby is also the symbol of America. Gatsby is, no doubt, Gatsby is a stand-in for Fitzgerald's view of America. Gatsby is a self-invented person. But he's, his whole life story, his name, Jay Gatz, he wants you to believe he's German. He's almost certainly Jewish, or very probably Jewish. And he's got a whole backstory, and he comes from the world of bootlegging and other organized crime. And we're all seduced by this, and we shouldn't be. We should see through it more clearly. And at the end of the book, this fantastic scene where Nick Carraway is lying on, Gatsby's now dead, and Carraway is alone on the estate, and he talks about, imagines the first people to see the new world, and especially New York Harbor, and to meet something commensurate with man's capacity for wonder. And that's this great evocation. And it's one of the most beautiful sentences in American literature, or paragraphs in American literature. But it also invites us to keep wondering, and not just to trust the artifact that's been put into our hands, but to think more deeply on it. What are books that I think everybody should read? Look, there are things that are part of the common heritage of what it means to be an American. I don't think, I think an American, whether you're a religious person or not, needs to have a pretty good grounding in the Bible. You can't understand American rhetoric and history without having a deep grounding of that. You need to read the fundamental texts, including the Federalist Papers. There are great classics that are widely shared of American literature: Moby Dick, The Red Badge of Courage, poems and songs, hymns. Hymns are really important parts of American literature. We don't pay as much attention to them as we did, but for Americans in the 19th century, the hymnal was a great source of literature. One of my Trump books, I used the words of an old Methodist hymn as my dedication.
Which one, Trumpocracy or the other one?
I'm now going to forget. I think it was to Trumpocalypse, the first one. And I quoted a Methodist hymn that said, "When all were false, I found thee true." And the hymn is, of course, directed to God, but I directed that to those Americans who had kept faith with the American idea during those difficult first years of Trumpism, when so many people I'd known had pledged their faith, not their faith, but had made their bet on Donald Trump. When all were false, I found thee true.
Yeah, but finally, David, I wonder whether your reading of Gatsby is a Canadian one. Doesn't it require, being American, a degree of belief that Carraway, rather than looking through Carraway, which is what you're doing as a Canadian, we need to share his romance, which is what being American is, believing in things that may not actually exist?
Yeah. That's quite a profound question, because one of the things we do in Gatsby, and we're with Nick, we watch with Nick, and we go to Gatsby. And Gatsby is, of course, in love with Daisy Buchanan, and he stares across the Long Island Sound at the lights from Daisy Buchanan's and her husband Tom's mansion. And that's how we think of Gatsby. Maybe most of it is staring across the water with longing at these bright lights. And I think one of the things that is very Canadian, especially if you grow up as I did in Toronto, which is right on Lake Ontario, is to look across the lake at the bright lights of the American shore, so much more glittering off than the Canadian. I still spend a lot of time in Canada. I have a house on the North Shore of Lake Ontario in a small town called Wellington, Ontario, or near it. And we look across the way, and it's a straight shot. And there's the American shore, the shore from which the people settled this area came, fleeing violence, looking for refuge, and the shore to which they've looked back because there was something magical on the other side. So yeah, that may be, I think maybe the thing that Fareed and I were saying is there's something about knowing America. There's something beautiful and powerful about knowing America from the inside, having American thoughts, thinking no other thoughts. But there's also something, maybe it helps you be an analyst of American life, to see it a little bit from the outside, and to have that certain critical distance that comes from experience growing up in a different society, even if it's one as similar to the United States as Canada is to the United States.
Well, there you have it. The David Frum Show, without even going to the Atlantic website. I think David's autobiography may not be out yet, but he's revealed something about himself. There's still an element of the Canadian about you, David. Wonderful conversation. And I absolutely insist that when that book comes out, you need to come back on the show. Thank you so much.
Right.
And happy 4th. I assume you're not going to be watching baseball or eating hot dogs on July 4th.
No, right? I will actually be on the Canadian side of the lake, and I'll be probably sitting on my deck looking across the water at the Great Republic, and wishing well to American democracy and all those who support and believe in it.
And reading The Great Gatsby, of course.
No, I'll be reading, right now I'm reading a big fat history of the city of New York. I'll probably still be working on. It's 1,000 pages long, so I'm sure I'll still be working on that come the 4th of July.
Hi, this is Andrew again. Thank you so much for listening or watching the show. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. We're on Substack, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all the platforms. And I'd be very curious as to your comments as well on what you think of the show, how it can be improved, and the kinds of guests that you would enjoy hearing or listening to in future. Thank you again.